Greetings, fellow truth seekers. Welcome to Paranormal M, your gateway to the unexplained. Hit subscribe and ring the bell to embark on a journey into the mysterious with us. Get ready for stories that challenge what you thought you knew. Haunted Nursing Home. The Lady in White and the Woman in Black. I started my job as a care assistant in a nursing home in 2019. The home used to be an old orphanage, which explained the noises of children laughing and crying, and also the sort of noise of balls bouncing and little footsteps. There are 4 floors in the nursing home, and each floor and the staff and most residents working on those floors would often see the Lady in White, or a woman in black. There are multiple stories staff share, and they usually share these with each other, but this one was mine. One particular shift, I started my day with the usual routine, coffee, and made my way to start with the first room. As I was walking into the room, I had seen a woman dressed in a long black old-fashioned dress. She was slowly coming out of the room next door. I rubbed my eyes as my heart sank and she was gone. Carried on my usual routine. The lady I was seeing at the time, she said that woman had been in here again. I asked what woman she was talking about, knowing full well I had just seen that I was shitting myself. She then went on to tell me that when she comes, it's either me or one of my neighbors that have to go. I was confused and scared and carried on asking her as many questions about this woman as I could. The lovely lady didn't speak for the rest of the time in her room. This was on my mind for the rest of my 12-hour shift. Ask Reddit. I was sleeping at my student apartment in southern Greece. At some point I wake up, look up, and I see a naked female sitting on top of me. Her body was amazing, but her face I couldn't see. She had her head tilted forward and her hair was in front. I remember my thinking process very clearly. I was not upset. I thought I was lucky. I assumed that my neighbor, hot-looking student, decided that she liked me so much that she broke into my apartment. This was the only way for me to rationalize the situation. First thing I did was try to grab her, but I couldn't move. I then tried to see how she came in. Window closed, locked. Bedroom door closed too. No way in. Now I'm starting to feel uneasy. As soon as I moved my gaze on her again, she moved her head up, revealing red eyes, sharp teeth, and no lips. Again, I tried to grab her, and this time throw her off me, but I couldn't move. I started blinking as hard as I could since it was the only movement I could make. Eventually, she disappeared, and I was able to move. Then I was sitting on my bed thinking. Turns out, science is way back. Looks like paranormal is a thing. My best guess was, put something on, rush to church before the demon hottie is back. This could be a succubus, I remember thinking. Church sounds like the right place. I planned everything in my head and then I thought, the internet. I'm sure that I'll find a slideshow article like, what do you do when visited by a demon, with the pictures. I quickly found out about sleep paralysis, and I rationalized everything. Felt good again, went to sleep, and by the way, if I'm wrong and the hot demon's reading this, please come back. I don't mind the freaky face at all. I would. I felt someone on my bed. So this happened to me legit, like 5 minutes ago. I'm currently in college and I'm living in a dorm. I share my room with one other person and they're asleep right now. I've had a habit of waking up earlier than I want. Mostly because the curtains that we have kinda suck, and the sunlight every morning just wakes me up. I woke up this morning around 8:45, but I still had time before my first class, so I went back to bed. I faced the wall to my left to try to block the light from the window to my right. As I'm falling asleep, I felt someone sit on my bed right behind my back. I felt them shift around a bit before sitting completely still. At first, I thought it could be my roommate, but they're very shy and we barely talk, so I don't know why they'd want to do that. Then I worried that some random person broke into my dorm. As I laid completely still, I felt my bed shift again before it was still. I felt genuinely terrified. I don't know if it was my paranoia or something, but I thought I might die. And in my mind, some random person broke into my dorm and sat on my bed. Eventually, I got the courage to turn around and face whoever was on my bed. When I turned around, no one was there. I was honestly surprised, but also confused. The pressure on my bed is now gone, and as I'm writing this, I'm trying to think about what just happened. It could have been a nightmare because I pinched myself, so it can't be. After I turned around to make sure it wasn't, I can't move. Well, rather, I can't wait to move out next week. Top hat shadow figure visited me in my sleep twice. I had an experience with a tall black shadow figure. I lived in a house that had 3 people killed inside. Inside the attic, the bodies were stuffed. They were removed when they found it from the previous owner, and I was about 6 years old, and I was laying in bed. I had a feeling of something watching me from the corner of my room toward the right. Well, I fell asleep, and I was outside all day, and I was tired from playing. Well, I woke up. I don't know what time I woke up. I assume it was midnight due to how dark it was. I had a shivering fear that shook me to my core. I couldn't move an inch. I never had this feeling in my life and never had it again. While my eyesight came back to me in the dark, I saw a big figure. I assume it was like 7 feet in length. It was looming over me with a giant top hat. The first thing I did was scream for my mom and dad, but I couldn't. I felt like my voice was broken. All I could do was cry as I saw this creature, or supposed man, staring at me. The crazy part is that it vanished into the dark and there was no traces at all of somebody being there. When I was finally able to speak again, I screamed for my mom and dad. They came in and I explained to them what happened. They chalked it up to just a nightmare. There was no way that someone was inside the house. That was until 10 years later and I was 16. At the time, we moved into a nice sizable house. It had about 7 acres of land. They spelled acres, A-Q-U-E-R-S. Creative. And it was about 5,000 square feet. Well, I was a gamer, and I would stay up all night back then. I stayed up all night playing some Minecraft with the bros. I got really tired, so I turned off my PC and got a change of clothes. As per usual, I went to bed, but this time I felt something wrong in the pit of my chest. I just assumed I was tired and nothing was wrong. But not long before I fell asleep, I heard something in the corner of my room, a whisper, along with dark, deep breathing. I couldn't move again. I didn't put the two together before it was too late. My eyes were darted toward the corner of the room, and I saw yet again this figure, 7 foot tall with a large top hat. I closed my eyes as tight as I could. I was breathing really heavy from what I saw. While my eyes were closed, I felt a heavy feeling, a weight was on my chest. I prayed for whatever sinister being or shadow figure would leave me alone. It just poofed. That night I was shook, stayed up all night with the lights on. Put some music on, tried to distract myself from what happened. When morning came, I told my dad. My parents divorced, really, so all I had was my dad. He told me that he knew something was following me when I was little, saying I told him I had a friend. And when I was little, that he just didn't want to scare me. Whatever this thing was, it was no friend of mine. I experienced nightmares of this shadow figure, I assume, almost monthly. But ever since I moved, I've not experienced a single nightmare. I moved many times due to the divorce with my parents, and I just thought I should share this experience. I'd been too scared to share for a while due to people thinking I'd be crazy, but this was my experience, and I hope somebody can find clarity knowing that they're not the only one that had this happen to them. Had something happen right in front of a customer. I work at a small H-E-B as a manager. It's a very old building for a grocery store, and I remember immediately asking people if the place was slightly creepy to them. Or maybe it was just me. I heard all kinds of stories from other managers and partners who had worked there for many years. Other than a couple creepy feels and thinking I saw a kid in the back area once, nothing much happened paranormal. At least, not anything obvious. Then one day, I had a fairly hilarious experience as it happened right in front of a customer. It was broad daylight, and I was walking toward our produce when a customer was walking with his basket toward me. Suddenly, a tomatillo flew across produce, was landing directly in front of the customer. Now, the tomatillos. What is a tomatillo? Now, the tomatillos are on the other side of where the customer was. They were shelving it, and it was sitting on slants down away from the customer's direction as well. The tomatillo somehow flew up over 5-foot produce tables and landed about 8 or 9 feet away in the opposite direction it should ever fall. I was in the position where I could see no one was anywhere near the tomatillos. Are they small tomatoes? The customer just froze in his tracks with a shocked look on his face and said, "What the hell, man?" I just shrugged and smiled as I knew there was no one there. The customer went around the corner to look and said, "No one's there, man." Well, no one was there. What the hell? I shrugged and kind of laughed at this customer's reaction. It was pretty funny, and what was I supposed to say? A ghost did it? He asked me to verify as well that no one was there, and it should have been impossible for the tomatillo to have fallen by itself that way. We went over possibilities and assured there was no way somebody threw it and ran somehow as I was looking right when it happened. A kid wandered by, just not really paying attention to our conversation, and just pointed at this kid and said, "That's it. It was this kid. He was just here and threw it, and somehow got away without being seen." I shook my head with doubt, and the kid looked really confused, and he said, "That's it. That's what happened." Then he smiled and walked off. It was like he was unwilling to let himself believe anything paranormal happened and was eager to believe anything else. Don't know if it comes across describing it how funny the interaction actually was. Also funny that involved a tomatillo, which is just fun to tell people the haunted tomatillo story. Now I have to Google tomatillo. Thanks. My first house. Ever since I can remember, the paranormal has followed me wherever I go. I'm a 41-year-old Hispanic woman, so we're generally superstitious by nature, and we believe more than not times the stories our ancestors share. Whether they're stories of warnings or just something that happened to them, we take heed in them. So when my parents moved into a beautiful rental by Lake Michigan, the whole family came to see the new home. My parents had acquired it under already strange circumstances. The man who was renting the home to my parents said that his two aunts lived in the home their pretty much their whole life until they both recently passed away due to long battles with cancer. The man told my mother he was surprised. He was even gifted this home, really, because his aunts were always so mean to him and the place didn't really hold good memories, which was the reason he decided to rent to a nice young family he wanted to see something good come out of a bad situation. He was even kind enough to leave all of the furniture to my parents, to keep, as my parents had 2 young children and one on the way at the time. So as we began to settle into the home, strange things began to happen from the very first week in our new home. My grandmother had stopped bringing her cute little dog by when she came because all he would do is bark and growl at the stairs with his fur standing straight as a pencil. My mom and dad were great at laughing everything off and making light of the eerie happenings to everyone. The rent was cheap, the location was perfect, and the house was fully furnished. It was going to take a lot more than some scares to get rid of my parents. One day, my brother and I were playing on the floor in the kitchen while my mother was making a fresh pot of coffee as she passed over us with a hot pot of water, and it exploded over all of us. My mother was panicked and yelling at my father to run in and put my brother and I in a cold bath immediately. As my dad was making sure we were okay, my mother looked at the bottom of the pot and there was a perfect circle cut from the bottom. My older brother was 4 at the time and I was 2. My mother was 4 months pregnant with my soon-to-be brother, which she was not yet aware of his sex. That'll matter later, but anyways. He began talking into thin air to a man that he had named, the Man in the Big Boots. As well as that, he was speaking of the mean old ladies trying to hurt me and my brother. You would think, I'm sure they got out after that, but nope, we did not. Another notable moment was my grandmother's birthday. We had the whole family over on my father's side, and my aunts hired a psychic to come over and do readings. As the psychic entered the home, she became visibly shook. Took my aunt, and she couldn't stay, and she refunded my aunt right then and there. She told my aunt before she left that we should all leave the home because it was evil, and she couldn't be there a moment longer. As she left, everybody teased my parents. I told you this house was haunted. Maybe you should hear the psychic out, my other aunt chimed in. My father responded, if she wants to relocate my pregnant wife and kids to a new one, I'll gladly leave. And from there on, what was already known about our home was never said again. Part 2. My First House. It's always been funny to me that when people see something they don't understand, they always do the same thing. Always trying to explain it away. And that's precisely what my parents did for a long while. As the night of my grandmother's birthday faded from my family's memories, the incidents continued. One afternoon, my mother was doing laundry as well as entertaining 2 children, and my Gramps was also visiting at the time. My Gramps filled a small kiddie pool on the side of the house, running a hose from the basement faucet through a window. However, the hose was short, but my Gramps insisted we needed warmer water as it was a little chilly even on some of the hottest days due to Lake Michigan's rigid waters. Anywho, back to my point. My brother kept pushing the small window as it turned both ways and had a large metal latch that locked from inside. My Gramps noticed and asked my mother to go lock the window before one of us got hurt. And as she went to lock the latch from inside the window, it was now latched as if it had always been so. My mom took that as I guess someone's looking out for them. They ignored something impossible considering no one else was in the house that day. Another time she found 2 fully knitted sweaters in the linen closet. One for a boy my brother's age and one for a girl my age. And along with that was a half-knitted one for a boy. My mom wasn't even aware at this time that she was having another boy. But what did she do? She put those creepy sweaters away and kept it moving. Soon things began to increase. My parents would get awoken several times at night due to all the big oak doors and windows all blown wide open as if somebody somehow ran in and out basically every entrance into our home. Another ignored scenario. It wasn't till a few months after my baby brother was born and my mother was getting ready to go out with all of my aunties after a year of no fun, she was ready to go. We had a large staircase to the left of the front door, and that had 2 landings. And at the top of the stairs was a bathroom in which my mother was getting ready in. She was talking to my aunties from the top of the stairs. So they were all looking up at her from the living room as well as watching me crawl my way up the stairs to get to my mom. As I reached the first landing, which was about maybe 10 steps up, I lifted into the air and floated down. I was sat at the front door by some unseen force as well as an ominous deep voice warning us to get out. Fake story, you say? Well, you were not the one who was haunted by dreams well into adulthood of some force taking control of my body as I float around with no control over where I'm going. Not to mention that ever since I left that house, the spirits have followed myself and my family wherever we go. It goes so much deeper than what I said, believe me. And to this day, I drive by the house frequently and stop and wonder what happened where and why did it go so wrong. The Smiling Creature. My friend went to a campsite over the weekend. When she got back, she told me everything while completely shaking. She was staying on a campground in Burns, Tennessee. She told me that the cabins were separated from each other and everywhere in the distance were trees. Each night, there would always be twigs breaking, but she couldn't see it because it was completely pitch black. She told me that she's a light sleeper, but not even the most quiet noise can wake her up, which she thought was kind of very strange. The last night she was staying at the campground, she was asleep like always, but when she woke up, more twigs breaking, but it sounded almost like that thing was right at her window. She jumped out of her bed, grabbed her phone, turned on her flashlight, and looked through the window. She couldn't see anything, so she decided to open the front door to the cabin. As soon as she was about to tell me the rest of the story, she starts crying. It took a while for me to get her to tell the rest of what happened, but after a while, she was finally able to tell me the rest of her experience. She told me that as soon as she opened the front door, she flew back to the floor, saying to herself, "Why was this thing here at this cabin every night while I was staying here?" She stood up, slammed the door shut, and quickly locked it. She told me that as soon as she got back from that trip, she'd been waking up at 3 a.m. every night after that experience. She started seeing glowing white eyes and a huge smile. She always turns on the lights in her room and nothing. Every night before she goes to bed, she thinks about that smile. She would say to herself, "Who was that and why was I their target?" The next day we started doing research. None of that stuff had anything to do with the experience my friend went through. This is a true story. If you don't believe me, ask my friend Kyle. She still wakes up at 3 a.m. to this day. Ask Reddit. I live in a small Cotswold village in the UK. I live in an around 400-year-old house. To set the scene, a few other stories from our haunted house. On a number of occasions when my sister and I were younger, my mom would hear us calling her name from our bedrooms when she was in the house on her own. Maybe her mind was just playing tricks, but she was certainly spooked. The floorboards of my sister's room are very creaky, and a few years ago when a couple of rooms were being redecorated, the painter that we had didn't start working on my sister's room because he heard noises inside and assumed that she was in there. He only later learned that he was the only one in the house. While watching a film with my dad, I saw something move past the doorway of an adjacent room in the corner of my eye. My dad asked, "What did you see?" I said it must have been a bit of dust close to my eye or something like that. He then said that he also seen something. Thought it was as if someone had walked past the door. Now, if you're still reading this, I am. On to my Home Alone story. It was pretty late and I was watching TV downstairs. All of a sudden my dog starts barking from upstairs, and if you own a dog, then you'll know that they have a very distinctive bark depending on the situation they're in. As I was hearing the bark of a very distressed dog, I go upstairs to check everything's okay, see if my dog's standing outside my sister's open bedroom. He didn't even acknowledge me calling him, he just continued to bark at the empty room. So I walk inside, turn on the lights, check around, and very tentatively my dog follows me in and sniffs around. Once he'd calmed down, I took him back downstairs with me and continued watching TV. 5 minutes later, my dog's lying beside me. I didn't hear any noises, but I noticed his ears prick up and he let out a quiet whimper. Next thing I know, he's bolting up the stairs, screaming his lungs out, and stops at the door of my sister's room, and I was obviously pretty reluctant to go back in. I quickly picked up my dog and carried him downstairs and shut him away so he couldn't get back to my sister's room. The rest of the night, my dog seemed to go back to normal. I didn't experience anything weird, but to this day, my dog acts very strangely around that area of the house, and in his old age has begun peeing on the door to my sister's room. And this is common for dogs to pee inside when they get older, but to only do it on the top floor where he had this traumatic experience just seems odd to me. I think he's trying to help you out. Dog style. Is my house haunted? My house is fairly normal. It's connected with another house, and I guess you could just say odd things do happen, though. For example, I have an awful feeling like I'm being watched at the moment. And very rarely, like down to yearly or like every 8 months, something odd will happen. Not enough to believe it's haunted, but still unexplainable. Such as waking up at dead specific times. Such as 3:15 a.m. getting the feeling of being watched, just like today. And a few years back, I swear I could have seen a shadow. Our house is connected to this other house, and this other house seems to have more reports, such as their car keys ending up on a shelf that nobody could reach under a bowl and things going missing. It's kind of known that the previous owner of the house died right next to the fireplace in there, which is then joined to ours. Do you reckon that we have a very, very tame spirit? I'm just curious, but I don't want to investigate too much because it's rarely active if it's real, and our house doesn't seem to have much activity, so I don't know. Ask Reddit. Things haven't been the same since we moved into our new place. I haven't felt quite at home, as if I'm somewhere I don't belong. When I'm home alone, I can't help but feel like there's something watching me, waiting and wanting for me to leave. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. About 5 months ago, my girlfriend and I decided to move in together. We looked at a bunch of places and each settled on one that we liked. My ideal place was set back in a little wooded subdivision, in a basement apartment. Hers was at a newer building in a downtown suburb. We flipped a coin and she won. On move-in day, we loaded up the U-Haul and set off for our new home. It was a scorcher that day, 92 degrees with the sun beating down on us. I'd grabbed what I could carry and went up to the apartment to unlock and prop open the door. When I tried to open the door, it felt as if something was holding it shut from the other side. But a little hip check and it swung right open. I made a mental note to fix it, propped it open, and went down to start unloading our stuff. After a few hours, we had everything all unpacked and it was time to return the truck. Locked up, got into the driver's seat, and just kind of set off to get my deposit back. When we got back from the rental place, I went upstairs to get my checkbook to pay the first month's rent and finish paperwork. When I unlocked the door, it wouldn't open again, and I just chided myself for not fixing it when I unpacked my tools. Once more I pushed into the door with my hip and swung it open. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a little boy dodge into the bathroom area. Thought maybe it was the heat playing games with me, but I did a once-over of the apartment just to be sure nothing was there. Nope, nothing. That was only the first of what would be many troublesome occurrences in our new place. Many of you may remember my story about Herbert. However, I don't think this was him. I haven't seen him much since the time I shared that story with r/no sleep. This is something different, something new. One night, while sleeping soundly, cuddling close to the one I love so dearly, I heard what sounded like someone trying to open the sliding door on the balcony. It alarmed me because we live on the second floor. I woke up Katie and asked her if she heard anything. She sighed and said, "It's nothing, go back to sleep." I was still shaken, but I rolled over and huddled closer, slowly drifting back to dreamland. A few weeks went by with not much mention, just some misplaced items and cabinets being open. Then again, at around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of the sliding door on the balcony. This time, I can hear a faint sound along with it, almost like a grunt. I wake Katie up again and ask her if she heard anything, and again she replies, "It's nothing, go back to sleep." I can't just roll over and fall asleep again. My inquisitive mind needs to know what the hell is going on. Grab my 9mm out of the nightstand, put on some boxers. It would be embarrassing to hold someone at bay with a gun in the nude, no? Nah. Made my way into the living room. I strained my eyes in the dark to see what, if anything, was out there. I was trying so hard to see what was outside that I failed to notice the vertical blinds were slowly swaying. Feeling fairly certain nothing was out there, I made sure the sliding door was locked and closed the blinds. I brushed it off as mind games or bad dreams from being in a new or unfamiliar place. The next month or so was normal. All was quiet throughout the night, and I slept like a baby. That was until last week. Right around 3 a.m., I woke up by that noise again. This time it seemed more frantic and urgent. I nudged Katie, and before I could finish my question, she said, "It's nothing, go back to sleep." But there was no way that was happening. Once again, I threw on some boxers, grabbed my gun. This time I was prepared and had been keeping a flashlight next to my bed. Grabbed that as well. Before I even made it out to the bedroom door, I saw the same shadowy figure I saw when we first moved in. It darted from the living room toward the kitchen. I quickly flicked my mag light and pulled the slide back on my Glock 17, seemingly in one motion. It was on, and this thing was going down. Made my way into the kitchen, nearly crushing my cat. Every cabinet was wide open, every drawer pulled out and spilled onto the floor, and why didn't this wake me up? There it was, the sliding door noise again. I spun around to go in the living room and catch whatever was making all this noise. I could see something moving outside between the cracks in the blinds. I could hear something pounding on the glass door. Pulling hard, I was trying to get in. Called out to Katie to get up just in case we had to run. She didn't respond. I flashed the light into the bedroom to make sure she was okay. I saw her form under the sheets of the bed and told myself she was fine. The pounding was getting louder and more frantic. Whatever was out there was going to either break the glass or pull the door right off its track. I was sweating, shaking. I felt like I was physically sick. The tension was mounting and I yelled out, "I have a gun!" But the pounding and pulling didn't stop. I decided to put an end to this and went toward the sliding door and pulled open the blinds. I took a deep breath, pulled on the cord, and the blinds swung open. To my horror, I saw Katie standing on the balcony, desperately trying to get into the apartment. She was banging on the door and pointing behind me, and I froze. Suddenly I felt an icy touch on my shoulder and a voice whispered, "It's nothing, go back to sleep." Series of weird occurrences. I don't know what to think. So a bit of background, I moved to Lisbon, Portugal last year. I found an apartment in an old building. I think it was built in like 1890. I live by myself, and I've never had a supernatural experience before this. All these events happened over the course of a 10-month period. But I think if I just bullet point everything that happened in chronological order, it'll probably be most simple. 1. I was in the bathroom and I hear a bang in the kitchen. I go out and see that my bananas that were on the kitchen shelf had fallen onto the floor. Hadn't touched anything in the kitchen for a couple of hours, but I figured they may have just unbalanced and fallen. 2. I'm working at my desk in the living room and the mug in front of me starts moving by itself, and then even changes direction and starts moving toward me. My reaction was actually like, "This is cool, what's happening?" I initially thought that was due to maybe condensation trail from the mug, but when I picked up the mug, it's bone dry. Like I had had a cup of tea the day before and not cleaned it up yet. I tried banging the desk, but I couldn't get the mug to move at all. 3. I woke up and saw a girl at the end of my bed. A girl I was dating was staying over that night, so I assumed it was her. Maybe she had just woken up. I asked, "Are you all right?" She didn't reply. I repeated the question and still no reply, so I reached over the tap and just kind of tapped her on the shoulder, And that's when I started to lean across and I realized the girl I was dating was still asleep next to me. A hit of adrenaline suddenly filled my body and went from being half asleep to wide awake. I was thinking, if she's here, who is at the end of my bed? Even at that moment I was thinking I must have dreamt it. But I looked up and the girl was still there at the end of the bed, stared in disbelief as her figure just slowly faded away. I was left stunned. I knew I'd been awake the whole time because I'd taken my retainer out to speak and it was still in my hands. 4. I'd started feeling uneasy ever since seeing the girl. At 2 a.m. in the morning, I heard a bang in the kitchen. I had to really build myself up to go out there. I had to convince myself I'd probably heard something from another apartment. But when I went into the kitchen, a load of cans from the middle shelf, the same one as the bananas, were on the floor, and everything on the shelf had been knocked over like somebody had swiped it with their arm. At this point, I started telling people about these things. At this point, which is kind of weird, as I'm kind of an unbeliever, tried to make an explanation for everything that had happened, but couldn't really come up with a convincing story. I realized that a few things had gone missing from my apartment, like a few items of clothing, a small bat I used to help stretch my foot. I look everywhere in my apartment, which is really small, but I never find anything. I also found a human scab on the floor. Super disgusting, I know. Ugh. I had no scabs on my body at this point, and my only explanation is that maybe it stuck to the bottom of my shoe and I brought it into my apartment. Ew. I also find hairs on the floor that do not belong to me. I hardly have any visitors, so again, this is quite a confusing thing to find. Everything then kind of settled down for a bit, and that last night I had another thing happen. This morning, my jogging bottoms, I think you would call them sweatpants in the States, they were on the floor and they were soaking wet. First, I didn't find this really weird, but then I started thinking about it. How did this happen? I was wearing them yesterday, so they were definitely dry during the day and nothing else in the apartment was wet. No leak from the roof, the floor around them was dry, and there were no drip marks. I even checked the sinks in the shower. They were completely dry too. Even the non-paranormal explanations I could think of made me feel uneasy. I realized my door wasn't properly locked last night. Could someone have come into my apartment, wet my pants, and then left? Am I sleepwalking? The jogging bottoms smelt of just water, but they were completely soaked like they had been submerged. I just can't think of how it could have happened. I'm actually moving out of my apartment really soon, but this whole experience has left me creeped out. Maybe there is a logical explanation for everything, but I'm struggling. A scientific test. One of the more common symptoms of ghosts you hear about is odd behavior with lighted things. TVs turning on, lamps turning off, bulbs flickering, etc. It's quite a popular mythology because humans are, from an evolutionary standpoint, selected for humans that can react very quickly to predators approaching at night when everyone's sleeping. Terrified of the dark, and the ideas of ghosts intentionally causing darkness is horrifying. While this is usually an instinct we can overrule, usually only children are openly afraid of the dark, it's still a very easily explained piece of mythology. Whenever it's convenient, ergo I think that there's a chance of paranormal phenomena I can interact with, I attempt to make a test. A favorite test of mine is simple. Ask the ghosts to flicker lights, since it's such a popular thing associated with ghosts. It should, in theory, be fairly easy for them to do. Picture a person sitting in a fairly well-lit room. Mystic spell board on a small table in front of me, 2 fingers on the puck, and with a completely idiotic expression on the person's face, that's me. I had a few fairly personal conversations with ghosts, and then managed to contact one that proclaimed itself my dead grandfather. At this point, I was having fun with it, not feeling particularly mystical, so I asked a simple question. Can you flicker the lights as proof that you're there? They dimmed and flickered. This is hardly conclusive evidence of paranormal activity. I would need to test many more times to satisfy rigor alone and rule out coincidence. However, I consider it an effective opening for further inquiry. If the test is possible to execute with some confidence, it may be possible to do much larger and more conclusive studies. In my own opinion, everybody who finds a ghost should do some kind of experiment like this. Well, a ghost helped me out yesterday. I was hanging out at my friend's crib last night. He lives on the first floor of a very old apartment building. All I know is that the building's creepy, and the stairs leading down to the basement are also creepy as fuck. I always try to avoid looking down them. He had to go pick up his mom, and I told him I'd wait, but something urgent came up after he left, so I had to leave. Problem is, I couldn't just lock the door and leave. I didn't have the key. All the doors are equipped with very old doorknobs. You need the key to lock or open them either from the inside or the outside. Each door is also equipped with one-sided deadbolt lock from the inside. It's a very old model deadbolt lock. You have to use force to turn it and hold the door in place at the same time for it to work. Anyways, no one was in the room, and I was hopelessly trying to close the door from the outside. The latch was faulty as well, so unless you lock the door, it'll always be opened. As I was holding the door shut, reaching in my pocket for my phone to call my friend, the deadbolt lock turned by itself. I froze for 3 and just busted my ass out of the building. I'm 100% sure the deadbolt lock is not automatic, and there's no way in hell it would lock by itself without using some force. It was my first time encountering something like this. Couldn't believe it. I thought shit was happening in movies, but growing up in Asia, culturally I hear stories and believe ghosts are real. But experiencing it is a totally different experience. The moment was scary, but I got home on time thanks to it. Told my friend, and he said hopefully it's a friendly ghost because he never experienced anything spooky since he started living there a couple of months ago. He told me he would move the fuck out if it tries to scare him. Haunted workplaces. I'm curious if anybody else has worked in a haunted place before. I seem to always find myself witnessing things I can't explain, that kind of following me through childhood and then into work at times as well. The first job that I experienced the paranormal at was one of those apple orchard places with an animal enclosure. It had a bakery and a barn gift shop. I worked in the gift shop. My coworker and boss said that they heard my name called once when I was gone. I wasn't sure that I really believed them. However, some odd things did happen there. We would often hear footsteps in the upstairs mezzanine, like a man with clunky boots was walking back and forth. It made me extremely uneasy. On one occasion while my coworker was on break, I had something more up close happen. I was stocking a heavy display pillar with bird ornaments. The pillar was difficult to move, but I remember centering it perfectly between two other cabinets before stocking it. As I was delicately putting on the last ornament, the pillar lunged toward me out of nowhere. It freaked me out so much that I ran to the bakery so I wasn't alone. Upon coming back, based on how I had centered it previously, the distance it had moved was about a foot. I have no explanation for it since it was such a heavy display. The second job that I experienced the paranormal was working at a thrift store. Every night we would hear banging on the roof at closing. In the mornings you would hear the sounds of hangers moving and shopping carts squeaking. My very religious and previously anti-ghost boss said that she would hear knocking on the door she opened alone in the mornings. And when she would open it, no one would be there. She grew to hate being alone there and admitted that there was something paranormal happening. On one occasion, a tightly wound music box started going off during closing. On another occasion during closing, a coworker saw a bald man peering over a rack, only to disappear when confronted. And then there was the sound of a woman humming that would come back in one of the conjunctions with a terrible burnt smell. The final event was a teacup flying off the top shelf about 4 feet before landing between me and a regular. So many things that I can't explain. And now to my current antique job. I've never felt a presence at my new job, but there have been several poltergeist-type things that have happened since I started. The first was a potted cactus lifting vertically out of a larger pot and then falling onto the ground. Then there was the sound of nails being pulled out of the wall and hitting the floor. Couldn't find the nails. More recently, a coworker reported witnessing a pair of socks come off the display rack, hover and then land folded. And then there was the knocking on the window after hours when no one was there. These things were all a bit eerie. Anyways, these were the experiences that stand out the most in my workplaces. I've definitely had a lot more happen outside of work, but those experiences are for another day. Let me know the creepy stuff that's happened at your work. I would love to read it. So would I. Submit them to me. The Mimic Spirits. I'm curious how many people have had an experience with what I'm calling the Mimic. I call it this because I'm unsure exactly what it is, but on a few occasions I've heard or seen someone I know only to later realize that they weren't actually there. My first encounter with the Mimic was when I was coming home from visiting a friend. As I pulled into the driveway, I looked up at the kitchen window. Inside, my mom was doing the dishes, as she would do every night in the exact same spot. Well, I opened the car door, locked it, started walking toward the gate. That's when I noticed that my car was the only one there, and I froze. I instantly called my parents and told them what I'd seen, only for them to laugh and think I was making it up. I sat in my car until they arrived about half an hour later and wondered what exactly I'd just experienced. My second encounter was with my now husband's father. He was the type of person who had a very dominant presence. With heavy leather boots, he stomped around and in a distinctive way cleared his throat. Often when I walked past his room when he was out, I would get a very bizarre feeling. It was almost like he was there watching us. One night we were having a party with some friends and heard his distinctive boots and throat clearing up in the bedroom. My now husband and I both looked at each other with an odd look, and our friend said, "Oh, is your dad here?" Of course, when we went to check, he wasn't. Just another creepy encounter with the mimic. I'm curious what exactly causes these phenomena. Is it some type of spirit, astral projection, time overlap? I'm just not sure. Curious to see what others have experienced. A feline friend. Growing up, I had a few different pets. 3 dogs, a chameleon, a goldfish, and my tabby cat, who I'll call Jay. Jay and I weren't always on good terms. She was already an adult when I was born, so she had to deal with me when I was an annoying kid. I was giving off way too much energy for her calm, older demeanor. Over time, though, we did become friends. Jay was with me through my teenage years until she suddenly passed away one day. I remember finding her on the floor mid-meal and wrapping her up in a towel. Jay had been in my life since birth. She had been the one animal constant that I'd had my whole life. She lived a good life, though. When she wasn't warming up at the heater behind the couch, she was roaming her 3 levels or exploring the neighborhood. She made it without any health problems to the ripe old age of 19, and for that, I have no regrets. With how she passed, though, there was no goodbye. It was sudden and unexpected. I often thought of when looking out of the window at her grave below the trees, I wondered if her soul was living on somewhere. Then one day, a cat spirit visited. It was a day like any other day. I was off school for summer vacation in college, and my family members were off working. So it was a perfect day to just lay back on the couch and binge-watch TV. As I flipped through the channels mid-commercial, I suddenly heard what sounded like faint purring. Confused, I muted the TV. However, the purring continued. I turned my head and realized that the purring was coming from behind the couch, the same couch I had laid behind at the heater. At this moment, the purring grew louder. It seemed to move behind the couch to the right in front of me and then right in my ear. It was like a cat was getting on the couch and nuzzling me. I felt a warm sensation take me over, a very relaxing energy, and then gone. It was over within about 15 seconds. I don't know for sure what that was, or if it was Jay, but I certainly can't help but wonder. She was the only cat that we ever had in that house, and the purring came from her favorite spot. I hope that it was her, and that she was coming to give me that missed chance at goodbye. Wherever she is now, I feel that she's happy. Me too. The figure in the window. Growing up, I always felt like my childhood home was haunted. This wasn't just because it was filled with antiques or because our front yard was surrounded by a rusty iron cemetery fence. I constantly felt watched, and I had some poltergeist activity as well as sounds that shouldn't be, and even some apparitions. One such apparition happened after I dropped off a friend one night. Like me, she also believed in the paranormal and she had her experiences. She was interested in coming to my house to see if she was able to experience anything there. She began talking out loud, supposedly recounting what the spirits were telling her. She said she could see a man walking up the stairs up to the kitchen, and as she said it, the stairs creaked like someone was actually walking on them. A few minutes later, she said that she was coming back down, and the creaking happened again. Eventually, though, we got bored, and I took her home. I hadn't actually seen anything at that point, only heard the stairs creaking. As I pulled back into my driveway after dropping her off, I had a clear view of the kitchen window. I saw a figure standing in the window and thought nothing of it since my mom could often be seen in that window doing the dishes. I just figured my parents had come home and she was getting started on them. However, right as I stepped out of my car, it occurred to me that my parents' cars weren't in the driveway. I was the only one at the house, and I quickly jumped back in the car and called my parents. They had a good laugh, thinking like usual I was just being weird. But I was absolutely terrified. I'm not sure if it was that man my friend said was going up and down the stairs or something else, but it's the only time I ever saw a figure in that window. My experience growing up in a haunted house. This is my experience of growing up in a haunted house. For me, it was normal. It was just a part of my life. But to other people, the house was terrifying. It was decorated almost completely in Victorian antiques, and the front of the house was encased in a rusty old iron cemetery fence. So right off the bat, it was bound to come off as creepy. In the house, I always felt watched. There was a hallway that connected all the ground floor rooms, and as well as a staircase that went up directly to my room. This hallway always had a weird energy to it, like someone was standing in it. Can't really explain it, it just always felt like someone was there. You constantly look over your shoulder at the doorway behind you. It was especially hard getting to sleep, and I was paralyzed by dread each night. Beyond this feeling, I had many odd experiences as well. I had a Barbie washing machine that randomly turned on one night on 3 separate occasions. Another time, right as I left my room, a radio I had never used turned on playing opera music. On another occasion, a friend and I were in the basement and heard creaking sounds of somebody walking up and back down the stairs, but no one was there. My phone disappeared twice only to reappear hours later in the middle of the floor. And once while sleeping, a random voice shouted in my ear to wake up because my mom had forgotten to wake me up, and it was true, she had. I also had an auditory experience, once of a cat. I was home alone watching TV when I heard purring behind the couch, where my old cat had always hung out. The purring came around to the front couch and then by my ear as if a cat was nuzzling me, but nothing was there. However, it gave me a very peaceful feeling. I saw 2 apparitions while living in that house. The first was when I was around maybe 10. I woke up in the night and saw a girl just standing there. She was wearing a Victorian-style nightgown and had long hair, maybe around 5 or so. She was staring straight ahead and was transparent but kind of glowing blue in the moonlight. She walked over to my stuffed animals I had right next to my bed and started touching them. "Do you like my toys?" I asked her. She immediately seemed spooked, like she hadn't seen me before, and ran toward the door, disappearing right before she got into the hallway. It sounds scary, but it really wasn't, and I went back to sleep. I saw the second apparition when I was around 18. I had dropped a friend off at her house that night and returned home to see a figure in the kitchen window overlooking the front of the house. My mom usually stood in this window while doing the dishes, so I thought nothing of it at first, but as I got out of the car, I realized that no cars were there and my parents weren't home. Got back in my car and called for them to come, and I didn't get out until they returned, and of course they just laughed about it, not believing me. Over the years, I had many other unexplainable experiences, many of which were witnessed by other people, and these experiences followed me to my workplaces and my first apartment, but then stopped immediately when I moved out of state. I'm grateful that I can finally be in peace and not look over my shoulder constantly. It's definitely stressful growing up like I did. Unexplained happenings at the thrift store. When I first started working at the thrift store, I didn't think about anything paranormal. I know a lot of people have issues with thrift stores, since they often receive belongings of the deceased, but my family were antique collectors. I grew up having experiences in my house. I went into the job not thinking much about it. It was a new building on a new road which stopped abruptly past the store, waiting to be connected to something in the future. I'd go behind the building sometimes with my coworker, and we'd walk around back there. It was pretty undeveloped. It was a large open prairie with tall mounds and farmland further back. We'd hang out on the limestone boulders and search for bead fossils on our breaks. The first thing I noticed were odd bangs that always happened at closing. It sounded like somebody was banging loudly on the roof. It didn't happen every night, only some nights. Sometimes you'd also hear a weird popping noise by the side door. Once the lights were out, you'd also sometimes hear car wheels or squeaking slightly, like hangers moving along the racks and plastic bags rustling. All of this might have some non-paranormal explanation, but it was creepy nonetheless. Other things were harder to explain away. One day I was shopping on my day off, and I was talking to one of our regular customers. I was probably 12 feet from him. Right in between us, on the top shelf, was a clear glass teacup, part of a larger set. At one point, I looked at the cup, and right then it flew off the shelf. I say it flew because it didn't just fall over the edge due to someone bumping the shelf. It traveled to the center of the aisle, but maybe 4 feet back, landing about 2 feet from my shoes. I remember the shocked look on the customer's face. He would spend hours in there, but instantly left after that. Another day, a coworker and I were closing up. He saw an old man thumbing through the center clothes rack. This was confusing, as we hadn't seen anyone in the store when we locked up. The man's bald head and big 1980s style glasses were peering over. Annoyed, my coworker confronted the man, telling him that he had to leave and that they were closed. The man didn't move, so my coworker walked to the other side of the rack and asked him to leave again, but no one was there. That same week, a music box randomly started playing full blast after we turned the lights out, creeping us all out. One other incident involved the sound of a woman humming. A coworker of mine said that she'd heard it in a certain area of the store. I didn't really think anything of it and figured she was just making things up. We'd noticed an odd smell that would come and go in the same part of the store. It's hard to explain, as I don't know what it was, kind of like weird, acrid, burnt smell. Anyways, later that day I was putting items out in that area and I heard the humming. I looked around, just thinking maybe my coworker was doing it to mess with me. Yet, no one was there, and I never heard it again after that. The final thing I'll mention is how my boss felt about the place. She was a happy-go-lucky person, and I saw a different side of her when I'd come in for the morning shift. She always looked spooked and very quiet, so I eventually asked her if she ever noticed anything odd when opening up alone. She was a very religious person. She wasn't really supposed to think about such things, and I could tell something was weighing on her. She told me that she prayed every morning because she was terrified. She would hear people knocking at the donation door in the back, but when she'd go to it, no one would be there. She said she also heard people on the sales floor sometimes, but when she'd go out there, it'd just be her. The thrift store closed a couple of years ago, and I often think of going back and checking it out. I don't know what was there, but I definitely feel like there was something. Ask Reddit. I pissed off a ghost at my old job. Short version. Was told the carousel was haunted. Didn't believe them. One night the maintenance door was open after I emptied the ride of guests. My second insisted that they hadn't opened it. Closed it, loaded guests, and it was open again. Has a turn latch that you put a padlock on. It could only be opened intentionally. I went inside, the center of the carousel. Mostly just the breaker and all the mechanical parts in there. Switched on the light to check for a maintenance guy that hadn't talked to me. Empty. I'm a little spooked, so I say loudly, "I'm not dealing with this shit tonight. We got another hour left, so get your act together." In my mom voice. Do safety checks, start a ride, phone rings, and when I answer, there's no one on the other end. A few minutes later, it happens again. After I hang up, I call base to tell them something's wrong with the phone. Supervisor calls back, says sometimes the phone rings randomly. Don't worry about it. I recant the tale to a coworker, and she looks at me funny. Did you turn the lights off before the music? No, I need the lights to get to the switch. Oh, well, make sure you never do. And if the phone rings after that, don't answer, just leave. I figure it's some kind of electrical short that causes it, and I go home. In the following days, I keep thinking I see it, something move in the corner of my eye, or I hear it running after I've closed for the night. I shake it off as I was working 15-hour days continuously. The next time I opened the carousel, we took turns. To go take a potty break, I came back to the security guard standing next to my ride. I saw him while you were gone. Just be careful, he says to me. What are you talking about? The ride? The one that tries to grab operators. I try to think which of my coworkers is that rude. He then goes on to explain that one of the 3 park ghosts is attached to the carousel, and he's the only mean one. He tries to grab operators and causes bad luck and ride malfunctions. Apparently I made him mad by yelling at him, and he decided to haunt the fuck out of me. And I hope you all have sweet dreams. See ya.